From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
All right, welcome back. My name is John. This is the Dewey Pod Monster podcast. It is a weekly podcast and it is about consumption. We are, of course, proud members of the You Run Podcast Network. You can find all of our previous episodes and all of our upcoming episodes at yourunpodcast.com. And while you're there, please do check out some of the other shows that are on You Run Podcast because they're all great and they demand your attention. Now, with me this week is the host of the Dewey Pod Monster podcast, and his name is Sean. Sean, how are you this evening?
John, I think it's time for me to retire. But I'm good. Thanks for asking.
And if you haven't noticed, if you're watching, we also have a guest with us this week. Returning to the show is our good friend Boomer. And Boomer, how have you been?
I have been fantastic, my friends. And yes, I cannot wait to get into what we're going to talk about this evening. I'm a little bit of a sicko, so here we go.
Join the club. So before we get into that, for those who aren't aware, Boomer is the host of another great show, also on the You Run Podcast Network, called Podcasts in the Woods. Boomer, do you want to take a second to tell people about Podcasts in the Woods and where they can find all that kind of good stuff?
Sure, why not? I always love to plug myself. So you can find us anywhere you get great podcasts.
I did it last time for you, so.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Hopefully the internet gods will be with me tonight and this will work. So we'll see. We will see. But yes, we are Podcasts in the Woods. We are all about alcohol, horror movies, and fun, of course. And yeah, like I said, you can find us anywhere you get good podcasts. Also, like John said, on yourunpodcast.com.
And you mentioned it's all about alcohol. Well, we all have alcohols with us tonight. Let's go around the room, and I'm going to start with you, Boomer, guest of honor. What's in your glass this evening?
I've got a little bit of Angel's Envy this evening. It is a very nice bourbon. And I love it because it's so complex. It has the high oil content, so you add a little bit of water to it, and it completely changes the flavor to it. It's amazing. So if you have not tasted Angel's Envy and you're a whiskey aficionado, you owe it to yourself.
Which one is it?
Just the normal bourbon. I actually haven't tried the rye yet. I need to do that.
Believe it or not, for them, I actually prefer the rye because they do the port cask finishes on their whiskeys, and the rye just kind of, there's something about the little bit of the heat from the rye that balances out nice with the smoothness of the port barrel. So I feel like they play well together.
Okay.
But you can't go wrong with bourbon. Sean, how about you? What's in your glass this evening?
I'm drinking Elijah Craig Small Batch 1789, and I like it because that gets me drunk.
Perfect. I also went low rent tonight. I'm just drinking plain old Woodford Reserve, nothing fancy. I had an unopened bottle behind my bar and said that won't do. So I opened it. I'm drinking with you guys.
And you said, that'll do.
That'll do, pig. That'll do. So if you somehow skip the title of this episode, for the week of whatever week this is coming out, was requested by someone in this room. We had a question of the week up a couple weeks ago and said, what would you like us to talk about? I forget what the premise was around that, but our good friend Boomer here suggested that two movies that we watched, one was Ringu, and the other one is Tokyo Gore Police. So before we get into what this movie is about, Boomer, why Tokyo Gore Police? What was the motivation behind picking this particular film?
Well, I didn't know if you guys had seen it. And like I said, John, I'm a sick bastard. And so I wanted to thrust this movie upon you guys and get your take on it. This has been one of my favorites for quite a while. I love Japanese splatter. I love Asian horror in general, but Japanese splatter genre is incredible to me. Takashi Miike. I hope I'm saying that right. I love Japanese, but Japanese does not love me a lot of times. Stuff like Ichi the Killer, Meatball Machine, all that stuff. I dig it. So yeah, I love this one. Spoilers.
Well, no problem with that. So we'll get back into first impressions and how we found this movie and all that type of stuff. But before we do that, let's kind of get right into it. Sean, tell us a little bit about Tokyo Gore Police.
All right, so for that, we go to IMDb, we look up the words Tokyo Gore Police, and that takes us to a website that is IMDb with some stuff about it. And it gets a 5.9 out of 10 with 13,000 ratings, and we'll start at the top. I'm not quite sure if it's a storyline or the plot, but it's on the top, so we'll start with it. It says, in future Tokyo, a young woman in the privatized police force tracks down her father's killer while battling against mutant rebels known as engineers. And if we scroll on down to the storyline, it says it's care of Anonymous. So thank you, Anonymous, current and often contributor. I think that's a set of words that make sense. It says set in a future world vision of Tokyo where the police have been privatized and bitter self-mutilation is so casual that advertising is often specially geared to the cutter demographic. This is the story of a samurai sword-wielding Ruka and her mission to avenge her father's assassination. Ruka is a cop from a squad whose mission is to destroy homicidal mutant humans known as engineers, processing the ability to transform any injury into a weapon in and of itself.
And before we go too far, I know I only recognize one person in this cast, but Sean, is there anyone in this movie that we need to talk about from a casting perspective?
I'm not like super familiar with Japanese horror or Japanese movies in general because I don't, speak Japanese, but I recognize Eihi. I know. Hopefully I don't butcher this. Eihi Shiina as Ruka, who was in Audition. That's pretty much all I recognize her for, but I know that Itsuji Itao and Yukihide Benny, they have a lot, like all these actors have tons of credits. So I don't recognize any of them, but they got some. I know one of them was in some Kamen Rider stuff. That's probably the closest I'll ever be to recognizing most of these movies.
Boomer, so you're the resident expert for the week. Aside from Ruka, is there anyone in this cast that we should know about?
So the only other one, special cameo as the racist Chinese character at the end of this movie is Takashi Shimizu. And you may not recognize the name, but I know that you will recognize Ju on The Grudge. He is the director, and he pops in all over the place in Japanese horror. And yeah, so he makes a cameo in this one.
Let's kind of wrap around to start with like how we found this movie and stuff. Again, this was recommended by Boomer, so that's why we're subjecting you to this as well as us. Boomer, how did you, aside from telling us to watch it, how did you come across this movie? Like, what was your gateway to this one?
Okay, so nothing too special about this one. So I started out, of course, like Blockbuster and all that kind of thing. Now, this was not in Blockbuster. However, Ichi the Killer was. And so I wanted more films like that. So you go on different websites back in the early 2000s, you're looking up Asian horror, craziest things that you'll ever see. And this one popped up all over the place. And so I had to see it. And that was pretty much it. Had really no idea besides the title. Okay, you know what you're getting into if you're watching something called Tokyo Gore Police. So I knew it was going to be wild, but had no idea like really how wild it was going to get. I mean, this is one of those movies that I kind of call that might as well happen movie. So yeah, I mean, you have chainsaw battles, that might as well happen. There's a guy eating bugs on a subway for no reason at all. That might as well happen. So yeah, this is one of those. And I've been an Asian horror fan ever since like the mid 90s, and it just kept getting crazier and crazier. And then, so yeah, I found it by just, the normal boring way of looking up, cinema websites.
It's a lost art, and people don't get the joy of doing that nearly enough anymore because now they just flick on Tubi or whatever and hope for the best. And I'm guilty of that too.
If only there were like some podcasts people could listen to that would like guide them into movies they might like. We should really start that.
Yeah. I mean, we could do that as a side project, and maybe we could also have that and you run podcasts.
Well, in the meantime, let's just talk about this shit instead.
Let's go. Sean, how about you? Is this your first experience with this one, or?
First one with this movie, I had seen, like Boomer mentioned, I know around the time that this came out, I was looking at, websites too, and found Machine Girl. Machine Girl is probably my really only true exposure, maybe Robo Geisha. I have a little bit of experience with that, and it was kind of finding these movies as you kind of like dig through the dregs of like horror movies, essentially like, oh, I hear this, they got this like splatter stuff I might be interested in seeing. That's kind of how I found out about Machine Girl, but that's really my only exposure to the genre. So I hadn't seen this before.
So for me, I'm like 95% sure I've seen this before. It kind of blends in with, as Sean mentioned, Machine Girl and those types of movies. I think I went on like a little kick at that at some point, and I don't remember which one came first. For me, we'll get to my challenges with movies like this. before we get to the end of this conversation. But, you know, this movie starts with, I forget the exact wording, but it says something like Fever Dream Productions or something along those lines to start. Like, it's like the first thing you see, like, well before the title screen. And I remember watching it this time and just thinking, well, that couldn't be any more accurate, because I remember this movie being something of a crazy fever dream. But we're going to get into it. So quite often I try to break down what a movie's actually about and do like a Cliff Notes version. This is a really, really hard movie to do that because frankly, it's all over the place. But the best I can really say like this movie is about is Ruka is a Tokyo Gore cop or some sort of law enforcement agent of some sort. And essentially mutants are all over the fucking place and a lot of crazy shit happens as she tries to avenge her father's death, maybe? Is that kind of right?
Fairly.
Sounds about right so far.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the most I could get out of it. I think, like I said, I know I've watched this once. I think I've watched this twice, and that's about how much I took from it at least 1.5 times through.
Well, I mean, honestly, the plot is really not too important in this type of thing. I really don't think it's more of just a spectacle. What am I going to see next? And there is a downside to that. You do get diminishing returns after a while, and I know that we'll get into our positives and negatives, so I don't want to step too much on that. But yeah, the plot is all over the place. Honestly, I watched it again this morning and really tried to pay attention to make sure that I knew what the hell was going on in this. So yeah, you're fairly accurate. Engineers that are being created by a scientist's son who wants revenge, and his dad killed the other dad, and it was at the behest of the police chief who wanted the privatization of the police, and hilarity ensues.
My dad could kill your dad. No, he can't. No, can't.
Yeah, and to kind of like piggyback on that, like I know Sean does, and I'm sure Boomer, you often take notes for whatever films you guys talk about too. I started to take notes on this, and before the title card, I'm like, why? Yeah, just pencil over the shoulder, like,
fuck it.
There goes that. Like, I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to, like, these notes, if I try to take notes, are going to read like someone was just high on some sort of hallucinogen and wrote down everything they saw. Especially when you get to alligator vagina and, you know, dog girl machine gun legs and shit like that. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So I guess we could start with positives then. So, Boomer, you're our guest. What are some of the things you love about this movie?
Well, one of the things that I love about this is this teaches you sound science. Like, I thought this whole time that the human body only contained about, what is it, 5 to 6 liters of blood, but actually it's about 70 to 80 gallons of blood.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So the first thing is this is a super accurate, down-to-earth film, which I always enjoy. The second thing, it's a blast. Like it's so much fun going from one thing to the next, especially if this is your first watch, where you start the movie with a chainsaw battle, and that's always a great thing. And then by
Japanese Leatherface in full like throttle, so.
Yeah. And then by the end of it, you've got a blood geyser turbo pack. I don't know. This guy's flying around because his legs were cut off, and he's using his blood to shimmy his way around the screen. It's insane. So I love just like the absolute insanity of it. I think it's hilarious in certain points, and I'm not sure, honestly, whether it's supposed to be actual social commentary or anything like that. But like the thing that just cracks me up every single time is the commercials for the police. And there's only like one commercial, but it shows it at the beginning and the end of the film, where they have this serial killer Takashi, and he's killed 15 kindergarten children, but we're here to protect you. And they just blow him away. And then it pans back to him and it says, serial killer Takashi dead. So
yeah.
I love like the dark humor in this film. The fight scenes, I love, and this like kind of harkens back to those old 70s kung fu films that a lot of us grew up on, where Nothing is realistic. Nobody's really. It's not fast. It's not any of the like the elbows and the knees and the jujitsu that everybody's throwing around in all these new movies. But it's like people flying through the air.
Kids these days.
Yeah, a woman using a RPG as as a rocket to the roof.
As a jetpack or something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just it's I love the humor in it. I love the campiness. And I love all of the creature effects that we get in it. Now, if you were to ask me like what my favorite kill is, I really don't have one. Like there's not a kill that really like stands out to me. But it's like the after effects of all the stuff that happens is what I really enjoy.
I didn't even think about favorite kills. That's a good question. But I'm not going to put you on the spot like that. Sean, how about you? What did you like about this movie?
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to be stark contrast to Boomer because like there are some things that I found to be kind of amusing. So it did have a nice kind of sense of humor at times. I liked, like at first, they have these satirical commercials. And it's kind of like it's almost ripped directly out of the pages of RoboCop. So you'd think I'd be like all on board. And at first I was like, oh, that's kind of clever. They have these commercials, these interstitial commercials that they just kind of pop in out of nowhere. It's like at the end of a scene, they'll have these commercials that are, satirical. One of them's about like this samurai or a katana that's like so strong that it can't be broken. And another one's about, don't, what was it? Harry Carey is suicide. Don't do this.
Yeah.
They have commercials about girls like cutting their arms with these fashionable razor blades, essentially like these fashionable knives to cut yourself, which I don't know if I really ever got the whole grasp of what the cutting thing was about if it had any kind of real thing in the movie besides it just being something that everybody did, like all the women did for some reason, like they all have scars on their arms. But really, I mean, that satirical, I don't want to get into negatives yet. So I'm going to leave it at when I first started seeing the commercials, I thought they were pretty amusing. And I did like that some of it was humorous, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. Those are my positives.
For me, I like that this movie is not afraid to push it as far as it can possibly push it. And you kind of notice some of the choices that are made in this movie. Like there's not a huge amount of dialogue in this movie. Like a lot of this is just crazy action, gore set pieces kind of strung together, and you're kind of putting the pieces together to form something of a story. But I feel like with this movie, they consciously made a choice of saying, we're just going to go balls to the wall and make the most like splattery, fucked up movie we can make. Kind of fuck everything else. And if that's what they were going for, I commend them for it because they put the pedal to the floor and they kept it there the entire movie. So I think that's pretty cool. I do like the overall like dark humor tone of the movie that really kind of resonates through the whole thing because it's really, if there's a serious message in this movie, I didn't find it. And it's really hard for me to take a movie that's this fucking Looney Tunes seriously. Even with how much like over the top gore is, I mean, that's what this movie is all about, is gore, really. With how much of that's in there, like I feel like maybe you should be watching and going like, oh, that was counterproductive, I guess, like to the plot, but it really doesn't make a difference in this movie. And it's weird because it's going to be a double-edged sword because I'm going to come back to that probably shortly here, but this movie really does kind of chomp down on what it knows it wants to be and just goes for it. And I respect that about it. Whether it works or not, we'll get to that, but there's no delusions about what kind of movie this is. And I think that's kind of fun. So
yeah, it's true. There's no like false pretense. It's not trying to be anything that it's not. It's like,
yeah, it's not
blood spraying everywhere, and that's what it wants to do.
Yeah, it's not delivering a message about like the, I don't know, drawbacks
global warming or something.
Yeah, or I was going to say self-mutilation, but whatever.
Well, I'm really surprised that both of you missed the take on authoritarianism in the Japanese school system that this movie really delves into. No, but no.
There's a school?
It's a metaphor, John. It's a metaphor. No, no, I agree with, like, I love the grassroots feel of this. I think this movie was filmed it's like in 2 weeks or 12 days or something like that. It's ridiculous. And I don't know if any of either one of you have seen One Cut of the Dead, and that horror comedy film. If you haven't, it's incredible. Like if you are kind of a film or a fan of filmmaking in general, it's hilarious. It's one of my favorite zombie films of all time. That's not really a zombie film. It's hard to explain, but that it has the same kind of feel that this does. It's like where it's some guy and they're just running around with a camera like, oh, film this. Oh, that happened. So you're right. There's not a whole lot of dialogue or anything in it. I think that, that's definitely on purpose because they didn't have any time at all. So it's just, all right, we got to shoot this in one take. And, you say these or whatever, just do this and cut his head off. And then we'll move on to the next thing.
Well, this also feels like, at least to me, it feels like a movie that's a Japanese movie that is kind of aiming for an American audience. It feels very much so like this came out in 2008. And I know at least like around people I was talking to, there was a lot of people that really got into the manga and all that type of shit around that time. So to me, this seems like a marketing opportunity. How do we take a manga like comic book and throw it onto the big screen in all its like fucked up fashion? It stopped short of becoming a hentai movie. Thank you. But it's kind of taking that aesthetic and cramming it into a almost 2-hour movie, which we're going to get to that too. But I think that I'd be interested to know, like, I mean, I'm not going to go as far to say this movie's a hit because it's not like, burning up some chart or something, but I'd be interested to know if this movie is received with a Japanese audience the same way that it's received with an American audience. Because I think a lot of people who watch this, I'm not saying anyone here is this or not, probably would have found this movie because they got into all that anime stuff, and then this is like a natural progression into something a little more hard-edged than that.
Well, I also wonder too if I watched the dub version. I didn't watch the subtitled version.
So did I.
And I'm wondering,
I was very happy about that.
Well, I was glad that it was in English when I started it, but the way that Japanese characters are portrayed for American audiences, and I know it's like that in anime too, the like kind of squeaky high pitched voices for the girls or the kind of the bimbo type characters. I'm just wondering if the original like audio track would have swayed me at all, because I did find like after a while that person that's like, there's a woman that's in a control box or something. She's just on video. It's a video feed. And she's like a dispatcher kind of character.
Yeah, what the hell is up with that lady, by the way? Yeah.
And her squeals are so like, and I'm sure that in maybe the Japanese language track is the same, but I feel like if it was, like if the English track was maybe played more serious and maybe not so campy, like obviously what's going on screen is not serious at all, right? We can all agree that it's like, no, this is satire. Like this is not really going to happen. But I feel like having some kind of serious, I know, having like a serious tone underneath it for me, maybe would have drew me in a little bit more or better for it. But after a while, all the characters have such stereotypical, like what you are accustomed to seeing in anime or in dubbed anime for that matter. Just for me personally, just really started grating on me after a while. And I just like found myself, regardless of what was on screen and the fantastical things that were happening, I just found myself like with my head, my head on my hand, just like, just watching it and observing it. And like, okay, I wish that I wish I could see the original track, the original Japanese track, and see if it was the same.
Hi, everyone. AI John here. Did you know that we're on the You Run Podcast Network? YouRunPodcast.com is home to great shows like You Gonna Eat That Crust, Pop Culture Reflections Podcast, Voices of the Mausoleum, and many more. Head over to YouRunPodcast.com and find your new favorite show today. So I don't mean to skip over anyone, but you said it, so I'm going to kind of pile into it, and this will move into negatives. The biggest problem I have with this movie is the length mixed with how over the top it is, because for a movie that has so much insanity on the screen, I actually found myself kind of bored with it, but with about a half hour left. And part of me was like, okay, you're just waiting for the next set piece to see what the next crazy thing is that's going to happen. But they do so much with the crazy set pieces and take so much away from what plot is there that you almost get desensitized to it within the hour and 50 minutes of this runtime. And I found that to be its biggest problem, is that it didn't hold my interest through its entire runtime. And maybe you could fix that by, I don't know what you trim out in this movie, because it's not like it really has a downturn at any point. But going an hour and 50 minutes into this movie, I felt every bit of it. By the end of it, I was like, Jesus Christ, like, okay, I get it. There's a bunch of blood. There's a bunch of gore. Like, what else you got? So maybe I'm the only one who felt that way. Someone please tell me I'm wrong.
I'm 100% with you. This is probably 20 to 30 minutes too long. And it does. It starts to drag right around the middle. And we didn't need that whole sex club scene. That goes on forever, it feels like. And then, okay, it starts to go someplace else. Like, why did we need the whole subway ride where Ruka is going undercover? Like, we follow her get ready, we follow her riding in the subway. Now, like, when she kills the pervert by cutting his hands off, that's great. But I mean, you could have flashed from 2 seconds.
That could have been a 20-second
Yeah,
scene.
exactly. 2 seconds of her getting ready. She gets on the subway, guy grabs her butt, they flash outside, she cuts his hands off. Ha ha ha. Let's move on. There's that. There's the cop montage that we got. And at that point, you're just like, what the fuck is going on? It has nothing really to do with the story, honestly. But yeah, there's several things in here. I'm completely 100% with you with the runtime. Now with the narrator, I love the narrator, and it's crazy that both of you have actually only seen the dub, because I've only seen the original audio, like with the subtitles. I've never seen the dub. So, and normally that's how I watch these films anyway, but I really am curious to see what the difference is. I kind of want to go back and watch that now. But she's just as over the top and screechy in the original audio as she is probably in the dub version. That's like a weird trope that they have. This is not like the first, the second, the third film that I've seen with a screechy narrator from nowhere.
But again, I think it kind of piles into the anime-like thing, which I don't know. I don't know enough about anime. I never got into it myself, but it just feels like it's going to that vibe is what it's going for. Sean, your thoughts on the length of this movie and whether or not you were bored?
Oh, I mean, you pretty much took the words out of my mouth when you described it. I didn't want to pile on, but yeah, I mean, I felt the same. It's really long. Like, Double Impact is the same length of this, and it drags, but it doesn't drag quite as much as this does. Like both what you guys said, cutting
you get to stop with the black silk underwear.
Yeah, never in my life over black silk underwear. But like, you could take that whole sex club scene out. Just for some backstory for anybody who hasn't seen this, one of the cops goes to this. He gets he feels like he's just run down, and he draws a syringe, and he's like, man, I really wish I could do speed. So he draws a syringe that is going into his arm, and it like energizes him, and he decides he's going to go to the sex club essentially. And there's all these people that are, I guess they're like experimented on. They have numbers branded on them. They're not really engineers, or you don't think that they're engineers, but they've had these experiments done to them. And he goes into the sex club and gets involved with one of the dancers. And she basically is the key man is the main villain. So the key man that's his little minion. And she basically beats the shit out of this guy. And that's when the alligator vagina comes into play. And I don't know if it's really a vagina, but her legs become alligator jaws, and she rips him up.
I see a lot of people online call it alligator pussy, so that's
okay.
I feel like calling it alligator vagina is the nice way to say
a little bit.
it.
It's a little step up class wise. We'll call it alligator.
I'm trying
vagina.
to class up the joint.
I appreciate it. So the key man comes and he turns this officer, which I find it hilarious. The guy doesn't even have a name. He's just like the chief or whatever. And he gets turned into an engineer, and he comes into that kind of pushes him as an engineer character. And he comes into the police station with his dick is like this big, it's like a big gun.
Cannon?
Yeah, it's like a cannon, and it's this big, huge thing. He's got 1 foot that's all twisted up and goopy and shit. And his what else? He has is it one of his arms?
Definitely got a UTI going because it looks like it burns like
he
hell.
needs some penicillin or something. And I think one of his arms, right, is all gunned out. It's like all
I think so.
It's some kind of gun. And he goes in and starts taking all of these cops. That scene, the aftermath of it, I guess I understand that they have to do something to explain how he has this huge rod and how he's able to take out all these guys. But the whole sex club scene, I've talked almost as long as a sex scene club at this point, but it's fairly long. And then the end where Ruka's trying to get to the guy that raised her, who is ultimately, spoiler, is ultimately behind the whole plot. It's just, like you said, it felt like the last 30 minutes or so, I was like, oh, okay, this is pretty close to being done. And I look and I'm like, 40 minutes? Are you serious? Oh, shit. And it just keeps going and going and going, much like I do.
I think to Boomer's point that he started this with, if he had just shown up anywhere with a dick cannon blowing up stuff or whatever, and there was no explanation to it, for this movie in particular, I don't think I would question it any more than anything else that happens in this movie.
True.
I mean, you're right. It does, I guess, help that they give some kind of backstory as to how he turned into that. But again, as Boomer said, if that just happened, would any of us really be all that more surprised than what we got from this movie to begin with?
Yeah.
Probably not.
I mean, I think an hour into this movie, you're just willing to accept pretty much anything. Yeah, you don't need the step-by-step instructions on why everything is happening. Yeah, if the good Lord in the middle of the movie rained down shit upon everybody for no good reason, everybody watching this movie by that point would just be like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Oh, this again.
And I honestly feel like if you can make it an hour into this movie, they could put anything on that screen. You're just like, yeah, oh, all right. What, is it done yet?
Yeah, Deshaun's point, like, you say, like, there were 40 minutes of this, and I've seen this movie probably 6 or 7 times, so I'm pretty familiar with it. But I did the same thing, even watching it that many times. Whenever they get done with the whole cop rampage, I'm like, oh, okay, God, it's finally wrapping up. I have to go to work here in a little bit. I'll start getting ready. And I look at the time, and there's still 25 minutes of the finale. I'm like, wait, where did all that go from? Are you adding minutes into my movie? Am I watching the director's cut?
Someone's behind the scenes slipping more footage in. And you're like, shit.
Yeah, imagine if there is a director's cut of this somewhere on the Tokyo streets, the 4-hour cut of Tokyo Gore Police or something. So
that might be the entire thing that they filmed, the entire movie.
I was gonna say, what do they leave out in a movie like this? I'd almost be curious to see, just out of morbid curiosity, doubling down on that. But bloopers. I don't think I could watch it all. Yeah, there we go, bloopers. So aside from the runtime, which it sounds like we all agree on, Boomer, is there anything else you do not like about this movie?
So the only thing, and it's terrible to say, because we've all talked about how wild this is. It's too wild, and I will say that by saying this now. How can a movie be too wild? So, kind of paralleling.
I can answer that.
I mean, there's nothing in this. I've famously said that there's nothing in a movie that I've been just offended by, or I don't have really triggers when it comes to film, so it's not like that. But it's just that it starts at an 11, and where do you go from there? Where do you go from the beginning of this film? I love the opening scene of this with the juxtaposition of the cheery music and the sweet little girl. She's the cutest, she's the cutest little girl. And then her dad's head gets blown off, and they pay that off. So I thought that was hilarious, and that was okay. I mean, wow, this is going to be wild. But then it just ramps up from there. And yeah, that first opening scene is just so nuts that it's you can't build to anything after that. And so if this had been, like we said, about 20 or 30 minutes shorter, and then they kind of built up to the ridiculousness that we got to the end, it would have been paced. It would have been so much better.
I think you're right on that too. When you start at 11, it's hard to get to 12. There has to be some peaks and valleys, but everything comes out of the gate so strong that there's really nowhere to go but down.
I mean, you say that the movie, there's pacing issues, and I mean, there's definitely pacing in this movie. It's just nonstop. So it definitely doesn't, it never, again, we've already said, that's the biggest thing. It never stops to let you breathe and kind of figure out what the fuck is going on in this story. It's just on to the next thing. John, is there anything else you want to pile on to this movie with? Like, we could shit on it more, I'm sure.
I mean, I could take massive dumps on it, but the, like I said, it's a positive because I like the commercials at first, but when they keep going and I feel like the Harry Carey one was, I probably totally butchered that, but I felt like that was the best one, and they put it out in front, and then the girls, cutting their arms or whatever, but then they would like recycle them and use them over and over again. And I did like the police one where they tell you how the police are privatized, but it starts to kind of wear thin. And it feels a lot of the things in this movie, to me, I mean, just kind of looking at it face value, feels to me like they're trying to go for that satire that something like RoboCop specifically pulls. RoboCop does such a good job about playing the satire and the social commentary and how the, police are this force and just all the different things that are going, consumerism, all these different elements. And I feel like this movie's trying to hit on that, but because, like we've said, because it's balls to the wall, like 100%, there's no like come down. There's no real message behind it. It's just kind of like do it to do it. And I don't know, after a while that just becomes, to me, it became like really kind of tiring to sit through and watch, because you're just like, there's no story. There's nothing that's really, there's no downtime. John, you've already said it. There's really no downtime to kind of be able to absorb it and like take a breath. There are little scenes that there's nothing, no action happening. They're kind of trying to have some kind of storytelling, but ultimately it just kind of comes down to like, we talk about this a lot. There's just like set piece to set piece to set piece to set up some kind of outrageous thing to happen, to have another outrageous thing to happen. It just feels like the movie's trying too hard to be edgy. That's like the big overarching negative to it. Is I don't know if like it was just the cinema at the time. We both mentioned Machine Girl, and I don't know if Boomer did or not, but like you've got Machine Girl, which is crazy over the top, and there's all this crazy shit that happens. You have movies like Robo Geisha that have all these crazy things, it feels like the movies at the time were just trying to like outdo themselves and outdo the one before, that it just, I don't know. I think with this one, for me, the pacing's just so crazy. It's just so 100% all the time that there's no time to really take a breath and like admire what actually just happened, because some other crazy thing's going to happen like right after it.
So I don't know if the title I'm about to use as an example is Japanese or not, but like a lot of Asian cinema in general has a tendency to be like really over the top and abrasively crazy, especially compared to American cinema. But even if you compare it to like a more well-received title like a Battle Royale or something like that, that movie has all the over the top crazy violence and all that. I mean, it doesn't have like alligator vaginas and like, dong cannons or anything, but that movie's got shocking violence and all that. I mean, I'm not against that, but it has all that in there, but it also takes enough time to develop a story and make you like some of these characters, distrust these characters, kind of build a world within it where they can essentially knock off the Running Man and make children do it, because it's what we do. Your main character, like Ruka, the main character of this movie, like, I don't really feel like I understood much about this character other than her dad's head got blown up and she maybe is pissed about it. Or she's just doing this because the movie said so. That's the biggest thing with this, is there's nothing to really like latch onto aside from the spectacle of the movie. And that, I think that's why I have a hard time remembering if I had seen this before, because I feel like I've seen that Clive Barker looking like dog sword chick that later becomes dog like machine gun chick, even though she goes out like a bitch because she just like throws her into a sink and like, oh, you're done for now. There's parts of this movie that I really feel like I remember from seeing it previously, but there's so little substance there that makes it hard to go back to and think, yes, I when you go back and watch a movie like, I don't know, Frankenhooker, you're like, all right, this is the scene where they go and like, deal with what's his face's bitches, and he, all the super crack goes and blows up all the hookers. It's great. You have peaks and valleys like Sean said, where you can kind of pick why this story works so well. My biggest drawback is just I don't know if this is. I mean, this will kind of. I'll repeat this, but I don't know if this is a film or a performance piece that happened to make it on. Because there's a lot of parts of this that just feel like some weird, obviously with a Gore budget, like sidewalk attraction, like you would find a hobo on the streets of New York, like reenacting this, and that's what they managed to capture and put on TV.
That's an interesting observation, John. A hobo reenacting.
And it always goes back to hobos.
Yeah, reenacting something on the street.
Hobo with a budget.
I was thinking it's much better than it's much better than my metaphor. I was thinking, it's the over decadent dessert, right? Like you order the creme brulee from the fancy restaurant, you're excited about it, and then the waiter comes out and puts hot fudge over the top of that, and then sprinkles and whipped cream, and you're like, wait, I wanted the creme brulee. And, it's all these characters. You're right. We don't get attached to anybody. There's, the barmaid and the not mortician, but the, whatever he does, the crazy.
Yeah, like the coroner.
The dude with the mohawk or whatever.
Mad scientist coroner, whatever he is.
The bone saw on his arm or whatever he is.
Right, yeah. And the scientist and the chief and the other chief and the hookers, and it's just like they're just throwing everything at you. And
see, when you say it all like that, it sounds really awesome. They have hookers. They got a coroner with a bone saw on his arm, and the chief, and all the barmaid, and all these people. You're like, that sounds like my kind of movie.
And then alligator pussy shows up, and you're like, huh?
And you're like, that okay? Still sounds like my kind of movie. Where do I see it? Where do I watch this?
I don't have a whole lot to kind of add on with this. Does anyone want to? Are we missing any big points before we start kind of wrapping up and getting into Jerry Springer final thoughts?
I just want to know what's up with the guy at the end. He's like the cop that's clearly in blackface with like the cone head. What is up with that guy?
Question mark? Boomer, are we forgetting any major points that we need to hit on with this?
No, not really. Like I was thinking at the beginning when you asked me to be on this, I was like, this has the opportunity to either be like the longest episode that you've ever done or one of the shortest, because how do you talk about this? Like you're either going to break it down like scene by scene, and because
we don't do
right,
that.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, and it's so bonkers, but if you don't do that, then it's like, well, for the 39th time in this movie, somebody was killed.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
Oddly so.
But you should see it. You should see it.
Well, with that in mind, let's, what time is it, Sean?
Then you're in for a big treat, bro, because it's hot dog time.
No one can be told what the Tokyo Gore Police is. It must be experienced. That's my Matrix impersonation. Sorry.
So with that in mind, Boomer, you can go ahead and take a red, a blue, or both pills and let us know your thoughts about this movie. Kind of start us in wrapping this up.
Okay. So yeah, on my hot dog scale, and final thoughts, I am just going to reiterate, you should see this movie. If nothing else, for the spectacle alone. The middle 30 minutes, the cop scene, you could fast forward all that, and you're going to probably have a much better movie. But still, I do love this, and I really do, with all that being said. And I know that you guys are doing the new hot dog scale. I don't really listen to the show at all, so I don't know how it works. So I'll just, no, it's...
Do whatever you want. It's fine. We don't really know how it works either, and we're the ones who made it up.
I'm going to cheat a little bit, and God, I'm probably never going to be invited back. I'm going to give this 3/4 of a hot dog.
That's pretty spot on.
I'm going to give it 3/4 of a hot dog because I do believe that you should not only watch this, but you should show this to your friends, especially the ones that you don't like. Have it playing in the background at your party. That way, like, you guys are having a good time, and then somebody turns around and like, oh my God, what are you watching? So yeah, it's great, but it's one of those things where you order the foot long with the chili and the cheese and the onions and the mustard and everything else, and you've just eaten a meal, though, like that was better like a few hours ago, and you're still kind of full, so your eyes are bigger than your stomach. So you do like it, but you just can't finish it. So 3/4 of a hot dog for me.
This reminds me of Justin saying that T2 is a family-friendly film. You should watch it with your kids. It's almost at
I'm
that
not
level.
against it. So
Right. Well, hey.
that episode's not out yet, so you can't. So you'll hear that soon, right before this one, actually. So,
Yeah, so that'll be out by the time this comes out.
Whose hot
That's
dog
right.
is this? That's yours?
I'll go then. For me, this movie is kind of one of those. It's a spectacle. You have to see it to believe it. It is so over the top and so insane that it, like I had just said maybe 5 minutes ago, I really do think this kind of crosses a line from movie into performance piece. So it's really hard to kind of judge it by the same standards as a lot of films, because although it's on film and you're watching it the same way you would watch a film, there's not a lot of elements that really make this like a story and an arcing like film narrative. That said, it's so ridiculous and so crazy, and there's so many like insane set pieces that unless you just don't like this kind of movie, and I firmly believe if you're going to put in a movie called Tokyo Gore Police, you have a good idea of what you're getting yourself into. Otherwise, like, prepare to have your virginity like blown apart, because that's what happens in this movie. Anyway, assuming that you know what you're getting yourself into, this is like one of those movies that you kind of have to see to believe. So I give it like half a hot dog. I'll watch it, check it out, see what all the fuss is about, see what the hell we're rambling on about in this 2-hour smorgasbord of gore and effects. But for me, you know, it's been probably 10 years since I've watched this. It will probably be 10 years before I remind myself that I don't remember what this is about and try to watch it.
Whose hot dog is this? That's yours?
Boomer, let me start off. I love you. Okay, so don't take any of this personally.
By the way, Boomer, you're always welcome on this show. You know what time we record normally. Just let us know. You can just show up. So that's
You don't
fine.
even have to watch the movie. So
Yeah. That's going
I
to
get-
happen eventually to someone. So
yeah. So my thing is, this movie to me, I'm a type of person that I need some kind of story. Like I need some kind of real plot. I need some kind of real story. And this movie just doesn't have it. We talked about it earlier, but it's like set piece to set piece to set piece. And there's these amusing fights or these action-packed scenes that happen, but they don't really progress the story. You can you feel like you know what's going to happen before it started. And I think my biggest issue with it is because it started at 11, there's nowhere for it to go but down. And I felt by the end of the movie, I just felt bored. I didn't feel like I even needed to see the conclusion of what actually happened at the end. I know there's like a little teaser at the end that the key man comes back after he's dispatched, and he feels like they build him up to be this real big villain, this big bad, but he's not the ultimate big bad, and he gets dispatched kind of relatively quickly. I don't know. I wish they would have just spent more time with him. I didn't like really any of the characters, like the character designs. I felt they were kind of just not unimaginative, but just for lack of a better term, they just kind of felt lame. Like there wasn't anything that I was like, that is the coolest looking thing. And when this movie touts to have all these awesome effects and character designs and everything, maybe it doesn't tout to, but I just felt like they fell short. I got to give this, again, Boomer, I love you. I got to give this 0 hot dogs. Like this isn't a movie that I feel like is a necessary thing to see. It's not something I feel like I'm ever going to come back to see it. And I feel like maybe if I would have seen it in that time when I was kind of more into this phase, when I saw Machine Girl, when I saw pieces of Robo Geisha, that I would have thought that maybe I would have thought this was like, this is the greatest movie. You know, I think for me, it might be something where I just watched it too late. And the other thing is like, I feel like this was trying to grasp some RoboCop kind of feelings, and it just missed the point on what made RoboCop so biting and so hard hitting, that it just kind of missed the mark on that piece too, because they have all these commercials, they have these satirical things. It feels like they're trying to give some kind of message, but at the end, you just don't know what that message is supposed to be. So that's really why I'm saying like, yeah, I feel like this is one I could pass on. Like, I think people, if you listen to what I say about movies and you're listening to me and you're like, oh yeah, I think that guy sounds like kind of how I feel about, I just feel like you could pass on this. There's other movies in the genre. I don't know what they are because I haven't seen them, but I feel like they're like other, my biggest recommendation, if you feel like there are movies like this that you'd want to see, is I would say see Machine Girl, because I feel like that, even though that's the only one I've seen, I feel like it's like the pinnacle of that style for whatever reason. Maybe because bias, because I've seen it, but That's my feeling.
I mean, you know what the difference is? In RoboCop shoots that guy in the dick. In this movie, the guy shoots people with his dick.
That's true. You've unlocked it.
That's the difference. So
You're the key man of the episode.
I am the keymaster. So
Where's the gatekeeper?
still in New York.
There is no Dana.
So-
There's only Zool.
So I don't have a lot else to add. Does anyone else want to chime in before we start wrapping up on stuff?
I will say that
No?
was the.
Huh?
I will say that was the kindest way. Sean is a kind soul to say that Boomer.
Thank you.
I would have enjoyed this film if
Not when he's off mic.
if am I
Or yelling at my humidifier, dehumidifier.
if I had no taste like you, if my taste had not been mature from years of experience, then I would have enjoyed this film. I mean, but you didn't say that. You said it in such a nice way, and I love that.
No, I do feel like it's a movie that it's like a movie of its time. You know, like you can't necessarily go back and watch, I don't know, a movie from the 70s that everybody thought was like the funniest movie, or a movie from the 90s. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but when you go back
Animal
and watch
House.
it now, I don't
It
think
does
that's
not
really...
age well.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't know. People hold that in such high regard. If like a person
Yeah,
in their
old white
20s,
guys hold
yeah,
that
that's
in
true.
high regard.
Because everybody that I know that thinks Animal House is like the best movie ever is an old white guy. But if you
Yeah.
knew some like 20-year-old person now and you're like, hey, go back and watch Animal House, they'd be like, this is shit.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this movie is shit. It's just not something that I would spend my time to watch again.
That's true. If it was shit, you'd be all about it.
That's right. If it was shit, I'd be like, this is the shit.
So, Boomer, aside from showing up here whenever you want, and again, doors always open, you're always welcome. Where can people find everything that you got going on, everything that you want to talk about? You get another chance to plug it, and if your microphone goes out, I'll fill in again for you.
All right. Well, hopefully not. We've done good so far. So fingers crossed, fingers crossed. But so Gabby and I run Podcast in the Woods, and we release an episode every 2 weeks talking about horror. Funny enough, though, in February, we are doing Fright-Free February. It's still hard for me to say that, where we cover 2 movies that are not horror films. So this is going to be kind of a departure, but you can check us out.
You guys should try Crummy Movie March.
Hey,
I've got some recommendations for you if you'd like.
well, that's the funny thing, because Gabby always picks like the good movies, and I always introduce her to something like this. So we can't really do Crummy
It's one
Movie.
of my favorite dynamics on your show.
Yeah, we can't really do Crummy Movie March because every month is Crummy Movie Month. So with Boomer's picks. But you can find us anywhere that you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever, Stitcher, a million other things. Wherever you find podcasts, you can find Podcasts in the Woods.
Is Stitcher still around?
I don't know.
All right.
Sure.
Sure.
If you're one of the 3 people on there, listen to us, please.
So I don't know if we're on Stitcher or not, but if we are, you can go listen to Podcasts in the Woods on there, because do that. For us, you can find all of us at the usual spots. We're also on all the major podcast platforms. We are available at crap.town. That is our site where you can leave us feedback. You can also go to Rockin' Tomatoes. I fucked up and said that, and now it's a site that takes you to our site. So go to rockintomatoes.com, or of course go to yourunpodcast.com, where you can check out our show and all the other great shows, including Podcasts in the Woods. If you liked last week's episode with Justin from Pop Culture Reflections Podcast, he's on there too. And you know what? There's been a bunch of guests on our show that have been on there. So go check it out, please. We urge you to do it. It's nothing but good stuff there. As for social media stuff, you can find us at Dewey Pod Monster and all the social media networks I give a shit about. If we're not on there, there's probably a reason for that. But if you feel like we should be on there, drop us a message. Let us know. I'll take that into consideration. And we're also a video podcast, so you can watch us if you really want to. I don't know why you would want to. Not a lot of people do, but you can. Sean, what am I forgetting?
You could be one of the few who watch us, and you could say to your friends, I watch this podcast, and they'd say, oh, that's really cool. What podcast's
Why?
in it? And you would say, I'm too ashamed to tell you what it is. If you're interested in any of the stuff that we talked about, we leave it all in the show notes. Generally, you can click it, you can watch it, you can pay for it, you can buy it. That would be awesome, because we love it when you consume things, because much like RoboCop and They Live, we want you to obey and consume. But anyways, we leave links. If you click those links, some of them are affiliate links, and we might get paid $1 or $2. That's the best way to support the show. If you want to answer, usually we have a question of the week. I'm kind of surprised we don't have one this week, but
We have a guest.
That's true, but we sometimes have guests and have podcast questions of the week. But I don't come up with
torture
those.
one of our guests. I didn't feel the need to torture Boomer. We like Boomer.
That's
like
true.
other guests too that we've also anyway.
But we don't like them as much as we like Boomer. That's what John's trying to say. Anyways, you can find us on social media at all the places that John gives a shit about. It's at Dewey Pod Monster. And if you want to follow my Michigan craft beer adventures, you can follow me at youtube.drafttherapy.com. Who am I? I don't know. But you can also follow me on social media. I'm at Draft Therapy, and you can reach out to me there. I don't know why you'd want to, but you could.
So that's it. That's
it.
all we got for this week. That's it. Again, please go follow Boomer and his show, Podcast in the Woods, at Woods Podcast 1, all over the place. Check out their stuff. We thank you for spending the evening with us and drinking and talking about this thing we call a movie. And for everyone else, we'll be back next week with some more bullshit.
This hobo sideshow. Thank you for
Hobo sideshow.
participating.
Hobo performance piece, please.